Good afternoon. It's Monday the 25th of February 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We're going to get straight on with Venezuela. Well, here is Maria Adabar, who is the German Foreign Ministry spokeswoman. Germany has decided to put sanctions, specific sanctions, Patrick, targeting Maduro himself, not Venezuela as a country, because Germany's saying that they don't want to make the lives of Venezuela's citizens worse. So that's very fair of them, isn't it?
Yeah, that's good. That's really great. I assume, Mike, this is targeting him individually. What sort of items might come under this? Travel bans, perhaps, asset seizures, freezing overseas assets of Nicolas Maduro and his family. I don't know the exact details yet of these sanctions, Mike, but certainly anything that might impede the movement of a head of state might be kind of worrying in terms of diplomatic relations going forward.
At the end of last week, the Russians and 50 countries, in fact, including the Russians, met in the United Nations on the issue of Venezuela. It was being described as a tactical group. And the purpose, they said, was to defend international law. So here's Vasily Nebenzia, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations. And he's saying that the meeting took place not only to support Venezuela's legitimate authorities, but also to defend international law. It's not only about Venezuela, it's also about the approach to resolving international problems and different crises. They said that they were extremely concerned that there may be some aggression and some violence over the weekend. As it turned out, there was. They said, "We pray there'll be no violence, no civil strife will start in Venezuela. We want this not to become a provocation that might start dangerous events." Now, this particular group that they're calling the tactical group followed other meetings, which included representatives of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Nicaragua, amongst others. So we're starting to see perhaps, what do we describe this? Various axes develop here, groups on one side or the other.
Well, it's interesting, Mike, this tactical group, if you look on paper a few years ago, a lot of these would be members of the non-aligned movement. But now, because of the crises in countries like Iran, because of the targeting of Venezuela and other countries in economic statecraft by the United States and its allies, now the non-aligned movement is quite aligned. So this tactical group, you could, how long will it be, Mike, before Washington, before the Mike Pompeos, the John Boltons of the world will be referring to these as Axis powers? But I'm sure it would be just as easy for Russia and its allies to slap that same label on the United States and NATO member states, Gulf states, etc.
Well, you're calling this a crisis, the Great Imperial Roadshow.
Yes, Venezuela crisis. And we'll go back. Thanks for that. So here you have the usual crisis actors here, John Bolton and Marco Rubio, Richard Branson, and Mike Pompeo. And so we move on, and the false flags have been coming fast and furious. This one was at the Santander Bridge. It seemed to be a fire, but it wasn't actually aid deliveries that were put on fire. This was fires set by opposition gangs or protesters. So this was Telesur here. And of course, John Bolton took and ran with this and said this was the Maduro regime burning aid that was being delivered by the United States. But of course, we know that that's not the case. We have video evidence to suggest that it was actually the opposite. So here's one of those. I'm not sure how to play this video, but there we go. So this is video that was posted online. This is readily available, and these are the protesters making Molotov cocktails. These are the opposition gangs. I don't know what quite to call them, Mike, but they don't look like the upper bourgeois class supporters of Juan Guaido that we see on all the high-profile events. But nonetheless, I can't imagine how you'd get gangs of kids like this to mobilize. In Syria, they just paid them and gave them amphetamines and Capticon. So what exactly is happening here?
Well, of course, there is aid going across the border, and this was an attempt to get more aid to go across the border. What would be in those aid trucks? Is it just food, or is there money in there? Are there arms in there? We don't know.
No, we don't know. So and here's another one of those. You can see this is the aftermath here. There, obviously, this is the creme de la creme here of the One White O opposition. I can't imagine. So this is a crowd that's hopped up on something. Doesn't take a genius to figure out exactly what you're looking at here. So anyway, this was all reported by the mainstream media as Maduro is so crass and so evil that he set U.S. aid on fire. And so this was also posted on Twitter. You can go and see many of these videos readily available on social media. So, 4 false flags, Simon Boulevard Bridge, opposition hijacked police MRAPs and rammed a security barrier at a humanitarian checkpoint. Western media blamed that on the Maduro regime soldiers. That was fake news. Then also at another different event, opposition gangs set aid trucks on fire. And actually the first one was Simon Bolivar Bridge, then Paulo Santander Bridge. Opposition set aid on fire. And San Antonio de Tachira, masked men firing pistols at civilians in streets. And this was a kind of interesting video of a woman screaming hysterically out a window and calling colectivos, colectivos. This is meant to infer that this is Maduro's gangs. And so, of course, this was reported in the Western media as Maduro regime soldiers and so forth doing these sort of random shooting of civilians. And then we have the fake Red Cross. So this is international aid organizations have made it accusations that people are using their insignias. So the Red Cross has condemned any of this activity of unaffiliated individuals posing as Red Cross aid workers trying to traverse the border between Venezuela and Colombia. So I can't imagine exactly what that would be all about, but use your imagination. And so in terms of the crisis, well, instability in Venezuela, well, there's also other forms of instability. This is Marco Rubio, Safer, Stronger America, Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. Marco Rubio has gone wild this past weekend. In fact, over the last 24 hours, I think he's tweeted about 70-odd tweets about regime change. We'll share a few of these with you. It's very disturbing, the behavior of this U.S. senator who's been helicoptered down to the border in Colombia, is posing with selfies with U.S. agents and basically threatening everybody involved with the Maduro government. And here's Marco Rubio. It started off with just threats to the head of the military and his family here. This was earlier, I believe, at the end of the week. And he said, you should think very carefully about the actions you take over the next few days. So clearly, Rubio's foreshadowing that the peak, the climax, is going to be on February 23rd in terms of the activity. So that would be Saturday. And so because your actions will determine how you spend the rest of your life, do you really want to be more loyal to Maduro than your family? That's a threat.
Yeah. Okay,
so this is using Twitter as a platform to threaten Venezuelan citizens, whether they work for the government or not, and their families. This is a sitting U.S. senator. If anybody thinks that there's a problem with this, Twitter received a lot of complaints about this, but they didn't delete his account. If anybody makes any mild political statements, their accounts will be deleted. We've seen many stories of this. And here is a U.S. politician who's literally able to get away with almost murder, threatening to kill people in Venezuela. So this is interesting. And then he follows it up here in a hysterical tweet. I believe this was just over the weekend on the 23rd. The Maduro regime is fired into the territory of Colombia, receiving reports of injuries after these attacks on the sovereign Colombian territory. Of course, no mention of the sovereignty of Venezuela, that he is threatening to overthrow their elected government. And the United States will help Colombia confront the aggression. So a few shots, apparently some bullets going over the border into the Colombia, and that's supposed to be an international incident worthy of intervention. This is Marco Rubio.
Yeah, we should reinforce the fact that this civil unrest was happening at the border. So if the Venezuelan police are on the Venezuelan side and they're shooting plastic bullets or whatever it is at people at the border, then there is a possibility that one or two of these are going to cross the border. That's a fair statement, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, this is the same techniques are used by Israel, sort of creating fake incidents where they would fire and Syria would respond, or Syria would use anti-aircraft missiles and at an Israeli attack, and then they would blame Syria for attacking Israel when they were actually defending themselves. Or jihadists would fire, throw grenades or whatever, rocket launchers, and it would go into the Israeli territory, and they would blame the Syrian army, and that would be the basis for retaliation. So this is the techniques that Marco Rubio is using, and here he is tweeting out a picture of Manuel Noriega, the formerly deposed leader of Panama. And there he is, basically no words. This is just Marco Rubio putting this out, basically sending a message to the leader of Venezuela saying, this is you, this is going to be you, you're next, basically. But it got even better than that. And this is probably one of the most disturbing tweets that anybody has seen by an elected official in the West, especially in Western countries that are, following the rules-based international order and promoting Western values. And this is what Marco Rubio tweeted out yesterday afternoon. This is a picture of Muammar Gaddafi on one side, and then Gaddafi after he had been sodomized with a bayonet and dragged through the streets before he was eventually executed. One of the most brutal public executions in the history of media, period. And Marco Rubio has basically tweeted this out. This is a threat to Nicolas Maduro, basically. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida. I don't really know what to say, but WikiLeaks. Well, go ahead.
Okay.
But do you have a comment on
No,
that?
I was just going to ask: is this man likely to stand for the presidency?
Well, he did. Marco.
But in 2020, is he going to? Will he go up against Trump?
It's possible. There's a number of people like Nikki Haley, Mitt Romney, who might challenge the incumbent Republican president, and these would be classed as rhinos, Republican in name only. It's the acronym they use for them. But Marco Rubio did run for president in 2016, and he came very close to getting the nomination. He was third place, but he carried a few states, and at one point he was challenging Donald Trump in the polls. But you can see from that, this type of behavior, this is not a stable individual. This is not, this is somebody who's disturbed on a number of levels. So, WikiLeaks, of course, followed up with something poignant, because nothing says human rights like gloating over a human being getting sodomized to death with a bayonet. Pardon me for the harsh language here, but this is what the conversation is right now publicly around Marco Rubio. And yes, it is disturbing. And well, Twitter put a block on it. Of course, if you're following Rubio, you'll be able to see these things. But on the public side,
yeah, but it's only a matter of clicking on the show media link.
Exactly.
It's not much of a block.
So they haven't. They should delete his account. He's in violation of Twitter's terms and services. Marco Rubio is. So here he is, and just to remind people, there's Marco Rubio in 2011 in Libya with none other than John McCain, and you can see Lindsey Graham in the background there with Al Qaeda posing. Actually, these were called rebels at the time, but these are Al Qaeda affiliates and people that the NATO member states, U.S., Britain, Norway, and France, and others were working with to topple Libya and turn it into a failed state that it is right now, where they're selling people in the streets as slaves. So there he is, Marco Rubio. And here he is. And so it's funny how they always revert back to religion. He's quoting a Bible passage here from Psalms 118. And I don't want to read all the way through it, but basically, in danger I called on the Lord answered me and set me free, etc. So this is Marco Rubio putting out Bible verses and then graphically violent pictures on the same Twitter feed. A little bit worrying. But then WikiLeaks reminded Marco Rubio of this Bible passage from Matthew 6:1. Make certain you do not perform your religious duties in public so that people will see what you do. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. So WikiLeaks is, I think, answered in the correct way to the senator from Florida. And so that's where we're at. And then you have the Democrats lining up. This is Hillary Clinton. I urge Nicolas Maduro to allow the humanitarian aid into Venezuela. So this is part of the lie that there's no humanitarian aid going in the country, when in fact that there is. They've received over 900 tons of aid, only they're not accepting it from the United States.
Yeah.
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 So, and this is Bill Clinton following up with the same virtue signaling. And this is Bernie Sanders, surprised a lot of people. He took a stand in defense of the government in Venezuela, but here he's effectively stabbing them in the back, basically reiterating the neocon script. That's Bernie Sanders, not in solidarity with the socialist government in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, or Nicaragua probably when it comes down to it. And this is Ro Khanna, a freshman representative from California. And they preface this is the virtue signaling preface that you have to have as a Democrat. Maduro is a failed dictator who violates human rights. And then they go on to say U.S. intervention is bad. So this is part of the sort of doublespeak of the Democratic Party in the United States. So, and here there are protests going on in major cities in the West, but it's not getting any media coverage. This is from New York. But so it's not going to gain much steam, unfortunately. So this is really giving a green light to Washington to sort of keep doing what they're doing, basically. So, but that's where we're at with Venezuela. So the coup or the destabilization that was attempted yesterday was a flop. A lot of these things were called out immediately through social media. People were able to find out what really happened, find out the truth, and disseminate that. And it's really put a dent in the U.S.-led narrative, which was meant to sort of, I think it was meant to kick something off, but it didn't quite reach the fever pitch, I think, that the John Boltons, Marco Rubios of the world wanted to happen.
Okay, well, that's all taking place over this weekend. Now, yesterday, Theresa May was in the Middle East, in Egypt, in fact. Well, what was she doing there? She was with her EU colleagues. For the first time, European Union leaders were meeting the leaders of the League of Arab States. So this is the EU League of Arab States Summit, which took place over the weekend in Sharm el-Sheikh. Leaders from both sides of this, including Theresa May, were there. And apparently they were seeking to strengthen Arab-European ties, so this is good stuff. Now, the League of Arab States, if you don't know, is 22 member states from Africa and the Middle East: Algeria, Bahrain, Comoros, Djibouti, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Mauritania, Morocco, Oman, Palestine, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, UAE, and Yemen. Now, Syria's membership has been suspended since 2011, so they were not participating in this summit. But you'll notice that Saudi Arabia was listed there because they're part of this. Well, Yemen, therefore, was part of the discussion, despite security and other things that have been going on. And, well, last week, the House of Lords produced a report on Yemen, giving peace a chance. And they had this to say: the International Relations Committee believes that the government is narrowly on the wrong side of international humanitarian law on arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Given the volume and type of arms being exported to the Saudi-led coalition, they're highly likely to be the cause of significant civilian casualties in Yemen. And they give some advice. They want the government to give much higher priority to resolving, not just mitigating, the humanitarian situation in Yemen. I'll come on to that in a second. They want the government to condemn any further violations of international humanitarian law by the Saudi-led coalition. They want to signal the failure by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Iran to back the Stockholm Agreement, that would have negative consequences for those countries. They want the government to do all it can to support the work of Martin Griffiths, the Special Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General for Yemen. They want the government to be more willing to use its role as penholder at the United Nations Security Council to intervene if peace talks are not progressing and if blockages arise. So more interventionist rhetoric here, perhaps. And they want the government to redouble diplomatic efforts with all external actors. So here's Lord Howell of Guildford, the chair of the Lords International Relations Committee, saying the humanitarian situation in Yemen is unconscionable, that the UK is the second largest exporter of arms to Saudi Arabia and the fifth largest donor of humanitarian aid in Yemen is a contradiction which the government must address as a matter of urgency. Well, have they addressed that? Alistair Burt was very sure that they have. He said Yemen is suffering the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Today's UK aid package will feed millions of Yemenis who face constant uncertainty over when they will next eat. So this is £200 million of aid, making the total quantity of aid going into Yemen around £700 million worth so far. So what is this? Some kind of effort to sort of, it's all right, you guys, I know our weapons that we're selling to Saudi Arabia are dropping on your heads, but don't worry about it. Here's a few packets of hamburgers or something. I'm not really sure. It is utterly hypocritical that this is going on.
Well, who's supplying the aid? Which corporations have the contracts? Which NGOs have the contracts? Which NGOs are subcontracting the supply of food? And so those are corporations. Or there's British corporations. So are they turning a profit on the aid? Because when the United States delivers aid, it's a good business.
Well, absolutely.
It's a guaranteed profit, guaranteed contracts, guaranteed overrides on the contracts. So no matter what your expenses are, you're going to get 30% on top.
Well, that's exactly it. So we're making money on the arms sales to Saudi Arabia. They're creating the humanitarian crisis. Then we're making more money through the aid budget. Yep. And away we go. Well, now at the EU Arab conference, Theresa May was there, as I say, and she was asked about Yemen.
I know you're going to tell fellow leaders it's time to redouble efforts to deliver a political settlement for Yemen, but only last week a House of Lords Select Committee report said the UK was on the wrong side of the law in licensing arms to Saudi Arabia. Will you now begin to suspend the arms trade?
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to be here in Sharm el-Sheikh to work with fellow European leaders, but also the League of Arab States, to support peace and prosperity in the region. And this is, of course, the first summit of its kind, but it is an important opportunity for us to come together and discuss shared challenges such as security, migration, development, trade. These are all issues on which our cooperation is crucial. And the fortunes of our two regions have been intertwined for a long time, and it is important that there are some key issues that we tackle head on and work together on those shared challenges. We continue to provide humanitarian support to the Yemen. We also will continue to press for a political settlement in the Yemen, which is the long-term solution.
So she just utterly failed to answer the question, Patrick. Absolutely spectacular, perhaps expected. But Federica Mogherini had something to say as well. And this is just a few seconds of what she said, but she did definitely give something away here, Patrick.
The Arab region was the only one in the world with whom the European Union didn't have a summit before, which was a sort of a paradox, being so close and so much sharing challenges but also opportunities. We would not agree on everything, as it is normal among friends and partners, but I think the summit is in itself a deliverable. The fact that it happens and that we establish this practice for the future. So I take it as also part of my personal legacy, the fact that we've managed to accomplish this meeting.
Her personal legacy. Her personal legacy. So is this all about Federica Mogherini's ego? Or is she actually setting herself up to for when Jean-Claude Juncker finally steps aside from his presidency of the European Commission? I suspect it's a bit of both of those, actually. But nonetheless, the key point here, Patrick, is, I think you'll agree, what we seem to be seeing here is the European Union attempting to push out its own foreign policy agenda. And we've seen Federica Mogherini increasingly in the last couple of years present herself as the de facto European Union Foreign Minister, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. This is the establishment of a federalist organization, body, whatever you want to call it. This is not, unlike the League of Arab Nations, this is not a meeting of a group of sovereign nation states. This is a new sovereign body being created here. She
fancies herself as the sort of founding mother of the modern European Union. I think that's when you put legacy in the same breath is what she was talking about. So, but yeah, that's the thing with, we talk a lot on this program, and you do with Brian Garish about military unification in the European Union. So it's all well and good having an army, having a military with interoperability, but when it comes time to deploy that military, they're being deployed under the banner of a foreign policy, and decisions are made by states, and that is their foreign policy. It's how they interact with the world. And so this means that Britain, France, Germany, all the EU member states who are involved in a unified European force will have to move with a unified foreign policy. And that's a big step from where we're at right now. And so it's not surprising, Mike, that they're not talking about this, because really that's what it comes down to. You lose your sovereignty the minute that you lose your ability to determine your own foreign policy and how your international relations are conducted, including military deployments. So that's a big thing. That changes the identity of the country. That changes your place in history. It's significant. It should be a main point of discussion right now.
It certainly should be a main point of discussion within the Brexit argument, and it certainly is not. Okay, well look, let's move on then. Slightly related because it's Middle East, but today the UK government laid a draft order in Parliament which prescribes Hezbollah alongside two other organisations, Ansarul Islam and JNIM. Those two organisations work in the Sahel region of Africa. This is the countries just on the southern end of the Sahara Desert, so sub-Saharan Africa. And of course the Sahel region is the region that Tony Blair is most active in with his foundation. So this draft order was laid in Parliament today. It prescribes Hezbollah. Now it's subject to Parliament's approval, but of course that is a formality. So from Friday, when the order comes into effect, being a member of or inviting support for Hezbollah or the two other organisations will be a criminal offence in the UK, carrying a sentence of up to 10 years. So this is what Jeremy Hunt had to say. It's clear the distinction between Hezbollah's military and political wings does not exist. And by prescribing Hezbollah in all its forms, the government is sending a clear signal that its destabilising activities in the region are totally unacceptable and detrimental to the UK's national security. So that is the government's position on this. Patrick, are they right?
So the statement by Jeremy Hunt saying the destabilization activities of Hezbollah in the region, but he doesn't name what those destabilizing activities are. He doesn't give any examples. This is basically an ad hominem attack of labeling Hezbollah, what Israel does on a daily basis and what the neoconservatives in Washington do. But what Jeremy Hunt's not telling you is that Hezbollah is a part of the Lebanese government. They represent a large constituency in parliament in Lebanon, and they provide defense for the southern region, which borders with Israel. Why? Because Israel used to occupy southern Lebanon militarily, and there was a few brutal clashes and wars. The last one that Hezbollah won, in fact, in 2006 and kicked Israel out of Lebanon. So how exactly, what terrorist acts have they committed? What when is the last terrorist act attributed to Hezbollah? When was it committed? Where was it? What was the conditions of this? Who determined the guilt? I think you're going back into the 1980s at this point. So that's 40 years ago.
And how is Hezbollah a direct threat to UK's national security?
I don't see how it is. So I would sort of chalk that up to hyperbole. So where is this language coming from? This is the identical language that you're hearing from neoconservatives. They're getting their talking points from IPAC, from the Israeli lobby, from Israeli ministers. Is this where Jeremy Hunt where is this coming from? You have to remember, Secretary of State of the United States said Hezbollah is running cells in Venezuela. Okay, so it's fantasy fiction. So my question is Jeremy Hunt getting his briefing sheets from the same place that Mike Pompeo is getting his briefing sheets? So Hezbollah run government agencies in Lebanon. They're responsible for running the Lebanese state. They have seats in parliament, Mike. So this it's not a terrorist organization. So how are you going to define this? So where's the distinction being made? What is the evidence?
So we've got two potential ways. Then you've mentioned one of them. If people are making suggestions that Hezbollah is active in Venezuela, then that's one potential way that this would be used. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn is the other, because he has expressed support for Hezbollah in the past. So we've got two potential ways that this new legislation can be used politically, at least. We wait to see.
It's disingenuous on so many different levels. And by the way, Ansarullah was listed in there, and that would be the Houthis, if I'm not mistaken. Ansarullah Islam, if that is the name for what they call the Houthi rebels in Yemen.
It's a different spelling.
It's a different spelling. Yes. We'll have to double check that. But then the question is, even if it wasn't, how long until it will be? Because that's seen, because it's affiliated or as dominated by Shiite Muslims, that might be considered a threat or pro-Iranian, according to Israel. So therefore, Britain and the U.S. have to, and France have to basically recognize whatever Israel recognizes as a threat to its security is also a threat to British security or to American security. How does this square with reality? Yeah. This is the problem.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Benjamin Netanyahu, then, speaking of Israel, well, he seems to be sliding in which direction?
Well, it's sliding to the far right, unfortunately, in Israel. And with the elections coming up soon, Netanyahu, of course, is under tremendous pressure with regards to corruption scandals and the fact that he lost his coalition that was delicately held together, his Likud-led coalition government. And so the accusations are of Jewish fascism, and this isn't. This is what the Israeli press are calling it. So, if you looked at this recent op-ed piece in Haaretz, this is one of their writers, Eitan Nichin, here at Haaretz, and he penned an op-ed a couple of days ago. Netanyahu now endorses Jewish fascism. U.S. Jews, cut your ties with him now, says this writer from Haaretz. Netanyahu has lost his moral compass years ago, but in this election cycle, a chronicle of a victory foretold, he no longer cares about appearing as the fascist enabling Pied Piper who will lead Israel into oblivion and isolation only to keep himself in power. He's made an alliance with what would be the equivalent of the Jewish National Front in Israel. And it's actually three different groups that he's coming into coalition with. So this is having trouble finding allies, this prime minister. He's having to go fishing in the extreme end of the political pond. In fact, not just in the extreme end, but actually having to go for the detritus of the political pond. And this is all Netanyahu has to put together a desperate coalition. Does this sound familiar, Mike? So he continues here. And really, the warning is to American Jews. This is a moment of a crisis for Israel as a liberal democracy, but is just as much a moment of crisis and a test for American Jews. So the question is, are American Jews going to blindly support Benjamin Netanyahu? And these are the same American Jews that give a lot of support to U.S. congressmen and senators. And when Benjamin Netanyahu comes to speak at Congress, gets 44 standing ovations. So they stand up and they sit down and they clap many, many times during these speeches. But is that support really going to be there? And this will be an interesting question. Will the American Jewish electorate, how will they communicate their real feelings about this to the Israeli lobby, to IPAC? Or does IPAC represent the hard ethno-nationalist, hard right in Israel? Or does it represent American Jews, who many of them are liberal, Mike? They're not extreme right wing. So you put this together with the anti-Semitism in the Labor Party, or anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party, and this sort of canard that's being punted around in European and American politics, in France as well. Well, it did so well in Britain, Mike. They decided they're going to launch it in the United States, and this is Mark Mellman. What's this all about? Well, Policing Democrats for Israel. This is a new organization this is on Low Blog, called Democratic Majority for Israel. So what does this organization do? Let's have a look. This organization is involved in a number of important duties, including maintaining and strengthening support for Israel among grassroots progressive and Democrat leaders, advancing policies to ensure a peaceful and secure Israel, of course, and defending Israel's legitimacy, very important, promoting a two-state solution, which is going nowhere, and Israeli-Arab peace through diplomacy and partnership. There's double speak there, encouraging American global leadership. So that's interesting. Oh, we lost the last bullet point there, but I'm not sure what that last bullet point was, but we might have lost that. Yeah. So the point of that, Mike, is that this is a new organization founded in 2019, which is going to be policing the Democratic Party to make sure that everybody stays in line. Again, this sounds incredibly familiar. So that politics across the Atlantic, things are mirroring each other at the moment, and so Israel has really gone for it in terms of enforcing its party line, especially on the left wing of both political systems.
Okay, well let's move back to the UK then, and Brexit. Well, Theresa May was giving some comment yesterday while she was in Sharm el Sheikh on this as well, and of course she's now revealed that the so-called meaningful vote, which was supposed to take place tomorrow, isn't going to take place now for another, well, more than 2 weeks apparently. So let's have a listen to this.
Okay, and just in terms of the meaningful vote on Brexit, you've confirmed that you can't hold that vote next week, that it will be held on March the 12th. Are you worried that this is going to lead to ministerial resignations?
First of all, of course, I'm going to have the opportunity while I'm here, although this is not principally a summit about Brexit, but I will have the opportunity to speak to fellow European leaders. And we've made good progress with the European Union and with the Commission. As you know, Iron ministers were in Brussels last week. My team will be returning to Brussels on Tuesday. We've been working on how we can deal with the issue that has been raised by Parliament of ensuring that the Northern Ireland backstop cannot be indefinite. And as we're continuing with those talks, we won't be bringing a meaningful vote back this week, but that will happen by the 12th of March.
So the 12th of March, and well, you got a preview of it because the Daily Mail had this to say: Brexit, in fact, could be delayed for 2 years, as Theresa May met with Merkel over. This was yesterday. So apparently, the claim is that the EU wants to push back the UK's departure to 2021 to avoid no-deal chaos. And certainly things keep getting pushed back, so the vote will be pushed back in Parliament. Civil servants have said there's not enough time to pass Brexit legislation. That's absolutely correct. And one minister said that Theresa May might ask for a 2-month extension of Article 50. A civil servant told The Guardian, if leaders see any purpose in extending, which is not a certainty given the situation in the UK, they will not do a rolling cliff edge, but go long to ensure a decent period to solve the outstanding issues or batten down the hatches. A 21-month extension makes sense, as it would cover the multi-financial framework and make things easier. They said that it might be difficult because it causes problems with European elections for the Parliament, but that those difficulties are relatively easy compared to what's going on with Brexit at the moment. So would the British people accept a 2-year extension to this process? I don't think so. I think that's a very unlikely scenario, but the 2-month delay is quite likely at this point, I would have thought. This is what Leo Varadkar actually had to say. I'd rather see an extension to Article 50 than see the UK leave without a deal. It should be an extension, though, with a plan. Well, I don't see any of that going on. We'll wait and see what happens, but it's just more of the same, it seems. Now, in the meantime, yesterday, well, in fact, on Saturday, this was Vladimir Putin was taking part. He was laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at the Kremlin for the Defender of the Fatherland Day. And he said afterwards, that we prioritize equipping our army. Oh, sorry. Apologies for that. We prioritize equipping our army with the most modern weapons, control and communication systems. Our prospective weapons do not have any analogues in the world, at least for now. I think that they won't for a long time. So this is what he said after he had left the wreath on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This is a very good point. It's something that Brian's been highlighting over the last several months since Putin made his initial announcement about the type of weapons that they have now, the advanced weaponry that they have, and we've seen some demonstrations of those advanced weapons since. And he's absolutely right, Patrick. There is no equivalent in the West. Mm-hmm.
So they're essentially showing Russia spends a fraction of what the United States spends on defense. So I think per annum it's probably around $70 billion, and the United States spends more than 10 times that, more than tenfold. So in real terms, you're talking about around $1 trillion a year. If you include Department of Homeland Security and the VA and so forth, it's upwards of $1 trillion. Some reports put it over. So what does that tell you about how Russia is procuring and developing, doing R&D, procuring its military projects? It's more efficient. They're getting more bang for the buck.
Well, and this is because they're doing it as a sovereign nation. They are running their own defense industry. They're not part of some interdependent multinational defense industry where at every level, there's so many levels of bureaucracy and also corporate interest. And each level of bureaucracy and corporate interest is taking profit out of the system in the West. Mm-hmm. The Russians and the Chinese, for that matter, aren't experiencing the same type of corruption.
So if Russia's spending $70 billion a year on defense, can they afford a boondoggle of a fighter project to produce something that doesn't work over 10 years and costs $500 billion or something like that by the end of it? Can they afford that? They can't.
No.
The U.S. can afford that. They can afford to blow 100 or 200 billion over decades on boondoggle projects because all of those corporate defense contractors are getting paid. Whether it works or not, doesn't matter. There's projects that could have been mothballed decades ago. They're still going in America. They're never going to use any of the technology, but they've been scheduled and they'll be wound up eventually, or they get an extension on funding, or they have an idea that they can sort of, retrofit or repurpose something. There's tons of these projects going on. This is what pads out the U.S. defense budget. So it's, but we have a superior system in the West because we have freedom and democracy, and we do everything better than everybody else. So why should we even bother listening to anybody else? This is.
I think the only freedom we have in the West at the moment is the freedom to rip off taxpayers in the Western Hemisphere. It is a staggering situation.
Freedom to rob.
Freedom to rob. It is a kleptocracy. There's no question about that. Okay, well, look, we're out of time. We're going to have to end on this one. This is the delightful Sarah Thornton, formerly Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, currently the head of the National Police Chiefs Council. Well, she has been made the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, Patrick, in the UK. So it's going to be her job to make sure that human slavery, human trafficking is dealt with. She said, good progress has been made in recent years, and I'm committed to build on that. Good progress, okay. Well, this is Sajid Javid and what he said last year whenever they produced, the government produced a report on human slavery and human trafficking. The impact is huge, both on human lives and our economy, with estimates putting its cost to the UK as much as 4.3 billion in 2016-2017. So let's just remind ourselves what the 2018 UK Annual Report on Modern Slavery said. Total direct government spend on modern slavery has increased year on year, estimated around £39 million in 2017-18 and £61 million in 18-19. So if Sajid Javid is saying that the cost of the economy is £4.3 billion, so it's £4.3 billion, the UK is spending £61 million this year to deal with it. I can see why they're not making too much profit there. This is, as we've said before on this program, this is very much like the drugs business, where you put a small amount of money into countering the drugs business while the drugs business makes big profits. This is the same deal. We're government putting a small amount of money into tackling modern slavery and human trafficking, while that industry is making huge profits as a result.
Well, I believe that it might be making 3 or 4 billion in profits, Mike. But how is it costing 3 or 4 billion? That's what I'm not clear of with Javid's statement there. Where's that cost for the state coming from?
Well, no, that's a cost to the economy, and so that's money coming out of the economy into the hands of people, the traffickers, and so on. So let's look at what else they say here. Improving the evidence about the scale and nature of modern slavery is a priority for the UK, well, their policy is pursue, prevent, protect. And so they're very good at prepare. They're very good at coming off with acronyms, but they're not very good at doing anything about it. And I just wanted to remind everybody what the situation here in terms of adults involved in slavery. 40%, 45% of adults involved in the labour market, and sexual slavery about 38% there. But the situation with children equally bad. This is the size of the profit that's made by human traffickers each year: £130 billion, 21 million victims worldwide, 54% in sexual exploitation, 38% in forced labour, 8% in other forms of slavery, including the organs trade. This is a huge problem, and well, we're putting £60 million into it, and we've put the lady who was in charge of Thames Valley Police at the time that Thames Valley Police was being asked to investigate sexual abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, and this is the lady who helped shut down that investigation and make sure that those allegations were not investigated properly and no charges were brought against the perpetrators. So is she really the person that should be in charge of dealing with this issue? I don't think so. Is she really independent? I don't think so. Huge profits being made, and really that seems like a business model that the government wants to continue.
It's a huge business. In fact, it rivals some parts of the narcotics trade.
Yes.
In terms of profitability, it's massive. So it's one of those things that people don't really think of when they think of black markets and they think of organized crime. They don't put human trafficking and human slavery up there,
right,
in the sort of top tier, but it is.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. We're out of time. Thank you very much, Patrick, for joining us. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time, 1 p.m. on Wednesday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.